from the island is that it really has an extraordinary effect on artists and audiences. And some of this may seem obvious, but it's something that we've really learned, I think, more and more. The first, and this is very obvious, is you take a boat to the island. And I'm going to quote Aaron Friedman, who produces Punk Island on the island, said, "You approach this by a special boat, so there's a discontinuity which gives you a clue that this is a different kind of place. It's not just one more stop on the subway past Battery Park." David Corn, who is the mastermind behind Figment, said, "Because the island's not connected, you can't just wander there. You have to make a choice to go there. Because of this, the act of going there is intentional. So this kind of requires a different level of investment than other events. But the boat's also about democracy. Everybody's on the boat together. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, and you sort of form as an audience. You're all visiting this place and nobody lives there, and that really has a big impact. And when you get to the island, of course, you have this sense that you've left the city behind. And again, this seems really obvious, but it's just this liberating feeling. There's nothing better than being out in the harbor and seeing that expanse of sea and sky. And it really influences not just artists, but also the audience. The sense of history, this of course is the glorious sculpture at the entrance to Fort Jay, but this sense that you can touch history, that there are actually buildings that were built in 1811. There's nothing like that elsewhere in New York City, and I think that gives a sense not just to the artists who create work on the island, but also to the audience that they're really in a special place. And that place is familiar. It looks like a small town, but it's also unrecognizable. And it's unrecognizable. This is one of my favorite pictures of Governor's Island. This is not Photoshop, but these are people walking with Fort Jay. And David Binder, who produced the New Island Festival and is here today, said, "For most New Yorkers, it's an unfamiliar place. When we go to see work at a familiar place, like a theater with a red plush chair and a curtain, we have certain expectations about what we'll see. When we go to Governor's Island, it's new. We're more open to the possibilities of what that work can be." And we've seen that consistently, not just, again, with the work that's been presented, but with the audience. And of course, you really do feel like you're on vacation. And we've tried to accentuate that feeling with things like hammocks and Adirondack chairs and bicycles and swings. But we all remember when we go on vacation, it always strikes me when I see people in a museum in a European capital, I want to ask them, do you go to museums at home? But somehow when you're on vacation, you're willing to try new things. And somehow we've managed to capture that feeling among our visitors. And I think that that's really influenced their experience of the arts. So what have we learned? We've been doing this for 4 years. We started with these crazy ideas that things like Bumbershoot and Spoleto could have a home in New York. Well, the first thing we've learned is art can actually put you on the map. And of course, the best example of that was the New York City waterfalls. In 2008, I used to open the paper and just to see Governor's Island printed in a caption in the arts section was so exciting. We felt so legitimate, like a real borough. And of course, we saw many visitors coming, taking our free boat to experience not only our waterfall, but the other ones in the harbor with that, and really bringing New York City to the water's edge. Art can change the experience of a physical place, and it adds a new chapter of meaning. Now, for people who are fluent in site-specific work, that seems pretty obvious. But in Governor's Island, we're talking about places that really had no meaning in our city. This was a military base. It was closed to the public. This is an image from, I think, one of the most extraordinary experiences I've ever had as a spectator. This was Dancing in the Streets, who did an amazing piece in Fort Jay, managed by the National Park Service. And what's amazing about this piece is not just the experience, but it's added another chapter to the building. And every time I go in that building, which of course I work on the island, I can remember the sort of ghosts of these dancers changing the meaning of this. This is a dry moat that was built in 1811. And so that's now really part of the living history. The National Park Service also hosted an amazing piece last summer, Veterans Flame. This was in the magazine. This was a flickering flame with the voices of veterans. And again, you didn't have to be, to see that experience to really have this sense of this is now changing the history of this building. And that's something that is in some sense unique to Governor's Island because while it was of course occupied and lived in by many generations of military families, it wasn't lived in by New Yorkers. And now art has really added another layer of meaning. This piece last summer Anthony McCall's piece was probably one of the most popular pieces on the island as part of Plot, produced by Creative Time. And what's ironic about this piece is this summer the church will be open, and this piece was pitch black, and now people will experience this beautiful little Gothic church. This is not a good image of what was, I think, one of the most transformational pieces on the island. This is Susan Phillips. It was a sound piece. And as you rounded the corner of the island, heading south towards the Verrazano, you heard these voices. We heard many stories from people on boats who would hear what they would describe as the sirens. With this, and her idea of this piece was that they were singing to the statue. And again, wherever you were on the island, you would hear these voices wafting over. And again, it's changed the experience of the harbor. It certainly changed our experience of the island last summer. But I think that lingers, and that's really a unique opportunity, and we hope to have many more opportunities like this, where art transforms not only the experience for the spectator and participant, but also the future of the island, because we're adding meaning to a place that really didn't have the same layers of meaning that what we're used to in the rest of New York City. Art also, of course, brings a new perspective on history, whether that history is imagined or real. One of the early pieces on the island was The Muster by Allison Smith. And then, of course, one of my favorite pieces, was The Archaeological Dig. This was an imagined archaeological dig. I got mail last night in preparation for this talk from the artist who created this. Geert is Belgian, and he said he's still amazed at how much more gullible New Yorkers were than Belgians. And how many people continue to write to him asking about progress on the archaeological dig. But he also pointed out that what he found was that kids immediately understood that it was imagined. And they would have to explain to their parents. They were like, this is fun. But for us, it was, I'm still stunned. The first word you saw was "gover thing," and how people think that was real. But really, it was, this place didn't have a history that we knew. And so the idea that you could imagine a history, again, as you're planning the future of the island, I think was just a wonderful experience, and again, adds to the layers of meaning. And as we learned in the archaeological dig, people want to participate in art. They don't want to just be spectators. And that's something that's very real on the island. And so whether they're at a Jazz Age lawn party, dressing in flapper outfits, dancing to Michael Arenella, or instead being zombies. This is the Bruce High Quality Foundation. Last summer, they recruited 700 zombies. There was a moment of conflict, actually, between the zombies and the Jazz Age when they did try to storm the lawn party and force them to play Thriller. It was one of the great, I get a report every weekend about what happened on the island, and I have to say that was one of my favorite weekly reports, and that was while Michael Jackson, may he rest in peace, was still alive. This was filmed in our movie theater and then was presented in the movie theater. People like to dance, and people like to eat slowly. This was actually an art piece. This was called The Slow Cafe, produced as Pioneers of Change. And the idea was that you would eat slowly and consider things slowly, and it was staffed by older people. And it was quite amazing to watch New Yorkers try to adapt to chatting and eating more slowly. People also want to play. And there are a lot of opportunities on the island to play. And again, this is participation. This is Improv Everywhere. I don't know if people are not familiar with this. You all get MP3 and you're told to go somewhere. This is one of the great images, this Queen Mary behind Governor's Island. But, it's amazing. You can get 1,000 people to do anything in New York.